Hello, good morning. We're here. Hello, everyone. Thank you and welcome. 'Tis I, Madame Askew, and I'm here with my wonderful guest, Catherine Lundoff. Catherine, welcome to tea.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me back again.
I'm so happy to have you, and you have your kitty friend as well. We love a
Ooh.
kitty friend. So everyone, you can hear our kitty friend purring furiously, which I love. This is so wonderful. So good morning, and good morning, Scone Mistress. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us for our Saturday morning. Sort of, it's a brunchy moment. We're gonna be very relaxed and talk about art and books and life and cats and
And
drinks.
cats and tea and tea. Tea.
Tea and tea. Hello, good morning, Eden. Oh, it's evening for Eden. Eden is in the UK. Thanks for joining us. Hello, Lady June Squill. Good morning, my darlings. Thank you for being on the Tube of You. I highly recommend that platform. I think from all the reports I've heard, it's the most fun, most superior of the options. But good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. If you have not had the opportunity to meet Catherine before, Catherine is not only the mastermind behind one of our favorite independent publishers around here, Queen of Swords Press, but also an author and a cat parent, activist, uh, general instigator of marvelous things. Hello, Catherine. How are you doing? Welcome to the show.
Hi. It's so good to be back, people.
Yes, so good to have you back.
So I was sharing my cup, share it with everyone. So I got this from Angio Lady Lines back. And I love it so much.
So beautiful. And she's on Etsy, and so you too can get your wonderful, artful, gothic teacup. I'll try and get a link up into the Discord for those of you who like to get your teacup game on. I see a bunch of comments popping up, everyone. Pardon me for not keeping up with you. I'm just so excited to have Catherine. Oh my good. Oh, we've got swords. We have moments of protest happening out in the world. It is a Saturday in North America right now.
It is indeed. And this particular Saturday in North America, yes.
Yeah, no, that's true. So you're in Twin Cities
Yep,
in
Minneapolis.
Minneapolis, and you've been there for a while, but you're originally from Brooklyn, which is a city I associate with activism, labor movement, uh, the front of the line sort of indie arts movement. Do you feel that growing up in Brooklyn really prepared you to go out into the world and be an instigator of all sorts of things?
Well, remember that. So I moved out of Brooklyn when I was 18, and Brooklyn was very different back then. So I was born in Brooklyn. We moved to Georgia. We moved back to Brooklyn. But this was like 1960s, 1970s era Brooklyn. So it was, sort of on that kind of punk rock, sitting through a rewatch of the Warriors kind of stuff. It wasn't very artsy back then. I was explaining this to somebody this week. I was talking about how I had been dealing with a salesperson, and when they showed up, they dressed like a mob wife from the person I was talking to was like, how would you even know? And I said, because I went to the high school that a lot of the mob families sent their kids to at the time. So I developed a certain idea of how the style kind of came together.
Absolutely. Well, you at a formative age too, but
Yeah.
I feel like that punk rock ethos is so critical to and not necessarily the style, although I have a fondness for some of the style. I never wanted to randomly stick safety pins through my body, but other things I liked. But the attitude, the willingness to like create your own, do your own, eschew the standard, that I see in your approach to publishing. Not that you've like thrown out the idea of punctuation or those standards.
Safety pins through the books.
You have a very good use of periods, commas, and semicolons, in my opinion. But you have created your own rather than waiting for the industry to create what you needed as someone who wanted to write books. When you were getting started with Queen of Swords Press, when you decided to go on this adventure, I mean, we never know what's coming, but did you have a foundational moment, this like little inflection point where you were like, oh, that publishing industry, fie on them, I'm just going to go and make my own?
Well, I suppose what actually happened was, so I actually grew. I'm that rarest of all things, an actual New York publishing baby, next generation. My mother worked in New York publishing for my entire childhood, teenage years, college years, years and years and years. And so I spent a lot of time at, the offices of various and meeting editors and all. What happened with me to start Queen of Swords had to do with one round of, I may be cutting out. I'm going to pause. Nope, I'm back. Okay. One round of dysfunction too many, at which point I said to one of my friends, I cannot possibly be more dysfunctional than the people I've been working with. So we're going to try to give this. The cake of things was I narrowly dodged signing a 3-book contract with Alora's Cave. And for folks who've been around in romance for a while, Alora's Cave was the first of the indie ebook centered publishers to kind of break off the web and make it big. And they were in Borders, they were in Barnes and Noble, giant displays of mostly naked dudes fondling women, the whole 9 yards. And they had, an impressive footprint on. They had approached me at a pitch event on Twitter, asked me to submit for their, to one of their editors, and I did. And they got back to me and said, this is great. Why don't you do 3 books for us? At the time I was like, wow, this is so cool. This is a great opportunity. So they sent me the contract. And I looked at the contract. This is more than I'm familiar with, and perhaps I should ask for some professional advice. So I rang up the local literary center, referral to local specialized in book publishing among other things. And so she's like, oh, sure. Here's how much it'll cost. Just send me the contract. I sent her the contract. And a couple of hours later, she called me at work and said, no, honey, no, don't sign that.
As Madeline says, they wanted your soul. Oh my goodness.
Oh, yeah. It had, now bear in mind that in corporate IT is a day job, and I have for like decades now. The non-disclosure clause was more restrictive than almost any other non-disclosure clause I'd ever seen. So not only could you not say anything about working with them, you couldn't say anything good about them either. And I asked him questions, various people in my circles, and people had either not signed with them or couldn't talk about it. And so I got back to them and said, okay, there's this and there's this and there's this. Can we negotiate this? No. And I said, well, that's nice. You came looking for me, remember? And so I decided to move on with my life and take my lawyer's advice and not sign the contract. And within 6-7 months after that, the lid blew off. It turned out that they owed money. They were circling the brink of bankruptcy. There were all kinds of rights issues, all kinds of like just pure mayhem, like worst case scenario of a mid-sized publisher going poof. And had I signed that contract, I would have had to write those books because they would have been part of the bankruptcy settlement, and I would not have seen money for them. So that was the point where I'm like, right, doing this myself because I've got to be better at it than this.
Oh my, yeah, no, Eden, yeah, remembers that drama. Absolutely. I remember that happening. I was on Smart Bitches Trashy Books at the time that that blew up, and
Yeah.
it felt like literally blowing up at the
Oh, yeah.
time. And it had been a place that people were like really lauding as pushing the boundaries of what was possible as a, you know, not one of the major publishers at the time. Although those covers, it was the early days of, you know, digital graphic design covers, and some of them were truly horrific. But
True.
we wanted them to succeed, and it was very sad to discover the sort of nonsense underneath, just underneath the surface. And like, I'm not going to pull that. There's a publishing stuff going on recently that we could get into. I'm not going to like open up that can because I want us to have a nice time today. But I think that this is a thing we learn often in the arts and in lots of fields, that sometimes a thing looks really wonderful on the surface, and then you just lift the lid a little bit and you're like, oh no, close it, throw it, run away.
I didn't want to know that. I did not want to know that.
Yes. And Cheshire says, that sounds familiar in the event production arena. Yeah, it's like an issue in the arts. And I think that this is a little bit of the willingness of artists to accept like a little bit of loosey-goosey bohemian behavior, to be willing to allow people space to figure things out, to, you know, not conform to rigorous email schedules. And I appreciate some of that looseness. At the same time, it can sometimes allow bad actors to really promulgate. So this is something I think. Oh, please go ahead, Catherine.
Oh, I think, you know, some of it is also that it can also feel like there aren't opportunities. And so people will grasp at things because they think it's, you know, it's their only chance or their last chance, or, you know.
Yes.
I mean, I will tell you, I was bummed to walk away from that 3-book contract. I had to go sit with that a spell and call friends and dinner. But boy, afterwards, I was really glad I hadn't.
Right. There have been that. To be honest, I try not to get into this too much in general because it's sort of water under the bridge. But the Grand Arbiter and I have absolutely ended up at events where I'm like, oh no, we should have seen all of the warning signs and not come to this. And now we're stuck and we have to put a good face on it. And it's hard when you are so eager to create your art and to share it and to get an audience for it, to walk away from these things. But you are a really good example of how being smart and being willing to say no to things allows you to say yes to better things and more things. And I think, Catherine, this feels really fearless and brave to me from this position and this remove, to be willing to take the leap on saying no, which is usually not something we talk about in the arts. Normally we're like talking about taking the leap and having faith to say yes to things. But this feels like a moment in which you trust your understanding and you trust your network, and that's, you have built up the network that you can trust. Can you speak a little bit about developing that sense of trust and connection with your community?
Oh, I mean, some of that stuff. So I, I was published traditionally long before, I started the press. I, spent some time, you know, meeting bloggers, meeting, people events, cultivating relationships with local bookstores, doing all of that kind of stuff. And it definitely was not something that happened overnight. Some stuff, very much went sideways. In terms of, it took me about 2 years to prep to launching the press because I was doing things like taking business classes and finding cover artists and figuring out programs and that kind of stuff. So I started planning it in 2015 officially, and then 2017 was when I put out the first title. I could have done it before that. I'm naturally fairly cautious so on some kinds of things. And this translates to how much money was I prepared to put into this? What am I prepared to lose? So calculating along those lines before launching, to get to a point where it wasn't going to be a catastrophic impact on the household finances. And I had the liberty to do that because I also, I'm continuing to work full time. I'd saved at the time. My spouse was healthy and working. So there were a bunch of things that kind of went into that made it possible. But I took a lot of classes. I, did trainings with the Small Business Administration. So there was just a lot of stuff that went in there. And I have to say that, but right before I launched the press, I went into one of the local, witchy shops that was owned by some friends of mine at the time. And I got a reading. And one of the things the tarot reader said to me was, "Most amazing network. Good job." And I'm like,
because network is so critical.
Yes.
To really any artistic endeavor. But especially something like a press where you want to not only give people an opportunity to have a professionally edited book and get it out there, but you want it to get sold and read. You want to make enough funds that you can do more than one book, all of these like wacky things. And that comes a lot with the network of humans who aren't just, I struggle with this because it's not just that we're looking for people to do something for us or that it's quid pro quo. It's, in the best case scenario, I think these communities that we build around ourselves as artists are reciprocal and sustaining rather than being like, an exchange of services in a very cynical fashion. I know that there's the cynical stuff out there in the arts too. I don't want to misrepresent what happens. Andy Warhol was not an altruist, but I think that in the best case scenario, it's what you've created, Catherine, where you have this sort of reciprocal community that maybe develops organically, or maybe it's something where you are able to go out and very authentically and intentionally start making contacts with people in your community. And we've got wonderful comment. Yeah, networking and community is essential to the queer experience. Absolutely. And you're a queer publisher and a queer author and a queer artist and a queer person, right? So, and maybe that's
rainbows.
Yeah, maybe it's just that we're used to having to make our community after coming out and being adults, and so that's part of the art experience. Do you see that parallel in your life, and do you feel that there's that sort of similarity between, like the Pride Parade and the like, we're going to build up a community so we can just be artists making art?
Well, I definitely think that, it's integral to everything I've done. I came out in the mid 80s. So, because what better time to than the height of the AIDS crisis?
Yeah, what a good time. Great timing.
Yes, I often give 1986 me a little pat on the head and go, yeah. Well, it was good training. And I started my own bookstore, and I ran my own bookstore, was a bookseller for a couple of years in Iowa. well. So I did that in the early 90s. A lot of that was because there was a really good general bookstore in town, and they did carry some queer titles. And by carry, I mean they were literally on a shelf under a table. That's where you could find.
Oh.
And they ramped up their stuff just long enough for me to go out of business, and then they put them back under the table. They've changed hands. Whether it's better, but
yeah, good.
This was the kind of context we were dealing with. So your choices were either, there was either nothing or, and this is before you get into the superstore era, which has another impact on things. But it often wasn't safe to be out. You weren't necessarily legally protected at your job. You weren't necessarily legally protected anyway. So there was a lot of that to consider. It's kind of thing that like, oh, that's the beginning of the whole DIY ethos, but really it goes back earlier than that. And, you've got, folks in the 60s and 70s, and they've got a mimeograph machine, and they're cranking out flyers so they can go to a picket line, that kind of stuff. They're protests at, the cafeteria, a big queer presence. These are targeted kind of stuff where people are finding each other and networking. And then during the 70s, you've, thanks to the fact that so many people are organizing around so many things, you have this, big outgrowth in, oriented newspapers, bookstores, movement groups, coffee houses, all of this stuff, And one of the things that kind of continues a lot of those movements into the 80s is you've got the organizing pull. You've also got, because the economy keeps tanking, a fair amount of cheap real estate in urban areas. so people can like get a building and do this thing, So there's a lot of that kind of social conditions that go into it. But in order for people to get as organized as they did toward the late 80s and start to see the successes that we saw move into the 90s, had to learn to crawl first. And a lot of that happened earlier than, the 80s. And you've got a lot of stuff going on before that point in time.
Yeah, I love this idea that, well, I have many feelings about this idea. I don't want to frame it as being just an unalloyed, like, oh, that's so magical, because it was hard. It was hard, right? But I love the tenacity, and I love the willingness to like find a way and to be scrappy and resilient. And I think that's so critical in the arts, and also a beautiful thing to look at this moment right now, when we're very anxious reasonably for what's coming in this coming year, that there were ways to make it work in the community, to build our own, to get out that mimeograph, which I know anyone under 40 is probably like, what is a mimeograph? And I don't know how to explain it, my darlings.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
man, yeah. Something are left. If we could leave the mimeograph in the past, I'd be
the smell of it. So Scone Mistress has a question. Do you recall if you carried Chris Ann Wolf's fantasy books at your bookstore? She was Scone Mistress's aunt.
Yes. I think so. I mean, at this point, I don't necessarily remember, and I did recently get rid of the inventory sheets because, like, I'm collected in a couple of archives, but nobody wants that level of specificity, and I'm like, which is unfortunate, but the way it goes. It's all like on a dot matrix printer with like the the holes on the side of the paper and the whole bit. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Good times. Good times.
Oh.
So I remember Chris Ann Wolf's books, and I think we probably had a few of them in the shop. So yeah.
Oh my goodness.
So it wasn't primarily science fiction and fantasy. It was feminist queer stuff, and that was pretty much the focus. So
I love that. I'm very fortunate, and should any of you ever make it to Tucson, where I live, I will be happy to take you there or to at least recommend it. But we have a wonderful feminist queer bookstore here in town that's been open since the 70s and continues to exist. And they have a very tenacious little sci-fi fantasy section like wedged in to this bookstore. And I actually started hosting our steampunk book club there
Oh,
in
cool.
person a
Very
billion
cool.
years ago now. So shout out to Antigone Books here in Tucson. It's a lovely place. Um, and I love this. Bill put a very nice spin on it. Mimeographs are just compact tabletop printing presses. Yes, very steampunk, by the way. Someone get out there and rub and buff a mimeograph for us, please. That would be
Yes.
lovely.
And
Lovely.
yes, that's all well and good, Bill, but they smell much, much worse.
The
And
smell.
given all the other chemicals that we, we look back upon and go, let's not use that anymore. I'm going to bet that those should probably have been included. Just a
Well,
less toxic steampunk mimeograph would be great.
that'd be so lovely. No, one of the things about doing steampunk and reading it and being interested in the 19th century is learning about all the ways in which humans were like, no, that's fine. I mean, it's poisonous and it's killing people, but totally fine. We're okay with it. No, that's horrific. It's true. That's a horrific way to die. We're still going to produce it and sell it. It's fine.
It's wallpaper. It's green. It's really pretty. What could go wrong?
Wrong. Oh my gosh. June remembers the smell fondly. It's a very particular smell. My darlings, if you are younger, all of your friends here in the comments who are over a certain age are like, the smell, it was very evocative. It's wonderful. But we are in a moment where people are rediscovering some of these DIY processes. And one of my favorites I see people, the young folks, getting into is zines. And that's such an 80s sort of phenomenon. I don't know how much zines were like the thing in the 70s, but I remember them with great fondness in the 80s, and the willingness to just go and like photocopy and fold and produce things, hand drawn things, and all of this beautiful nonsense. It's very ephemeral. And we've come to rely on the internet a great deal these days to move away from those like handmade in your basement, in your living room experiences. But we don't have to give them up. We can still use them. And I think word of mouth is still incredibly important. Of all of the sort of old school analog ways of connecting and promoting as an artist, publisher, author, what is one you really hope will come back and you'll be able to like have this sort of reconnect with it and also maybe enjoy seeing it out in the world again, used by younger people? Not necessarily mimeographs, though.
Well, I think you're right about zines. I think that, for us, certainly, some direct sales. So, we're doing about 30 events a year. Probably not going to try to do that many this year because I was toast by the time we hit the end of December. But what it does is we do multiple local prides. We do a couple of queer book events. We do some cons and team gear local. Yeah, come by. It's a lot of fun. It'll be in April. We also do, Twin Cities Book Festival and things like that. And what it does when you do things year in and year out is that people get used to you. And so we have a lot of times where people come up to the table and say, okay, what's new this year? Great, I'll then.
I love that.
You don't know what it's about? They're like, no, it'll be great.
I love that. Well, and honestly, we've had this conversation before, but there are times that I'm so startled that you are such a small press because the quality of the books you produce and edit are absolutely smashing. They're stunning books. You put so much into them, and I know one of the things you choose to do as an editor is to limit the number of books you produce in a year so you can have that high quality.
It's a little more complicated than that. I would love to tell you that that is why we do the things we do, but there's
Clearly that's how it's reading to me. I'm like, oh, Catherine is being very
probably sounds a lot better than my actual life, but yeah. So for the last few years, I work full time in the press. I write, I teach, but I was also the caregiver for my wife who developed dementia in 2020 and went downhill pretty quickly after that. So I was juggling all of that stuff, and there just wasn't bandwidth for me to fit in more books to that. And in many respects, we're still sort of recovering from that. So I think it's getting better, but there's still, things to deal with. And she's currently in hospice. So that's kind of, where things are going to end up. She's not going to graduate from hospice, as the terminology has it. But that had a lot of impact on why things were at where they were at. For context, when I ran my own bookstore, I worked so hard. I got walking pneumonia. I contracted it from somebody else, and I ended up coughing for 8 months because I didn't have health insurance. So I remember those days, and I'm like, let's not do that again.
No. Look, we can make many fun stories out of our suffering as artists in the past. I was sharing one recently about how I did a performance with a brown recluse fight. Yeah. Yes. I did go to the emergency room the night before it started, and I had the wound cleaned out, but so it wasn't spreading and getting worse. But I did perform the whole weekend with the wound and medicated. And it's this thing where when you're an artist, especially a young artist, you have very few choices. You have to sort of persevere if you want to do the thing, because there isn't a person who can do your job for you. It's not like you had a stand-in who could be like, it's fine, Catherine, I'll run the bookstore for you. It's always like such a shoestring experience. And some of that is, honestly, my darling, some of that is deeply political in nature, because there isn't the social safety net or the support for independent artists to do these things. And we want to do them anyway, so we do them anyway. But it puts you in this sort of tenuous position sometimes. And as we get older, no one really wants to remain there. That's not a good time. Walking pneumonia and having a cough for 8 months is not a good time. That's not fun.
No, it really isn't.
It's not fun when you're young. It's certainly not fun when you are no longer young. As I like to say, I'm no longer young, and I'm happily so. But it's really hard to find that balance, because the drive doesn't disappear. The desire to make art and to live this life doesn't disappear. It's just that we have to have some sort of balance, right? So how I don't feel like I've ever found a good answer for that, to be honest. And I'm very curious about how other people try and create their sense of balance as an artist with their need to not have walking pneumonia for 8 months.
It's challenging for me because my personality lends itself to just, go and go and go and go. And, I've had to face the fact that my body no longer wants me to go and go and go and go. And I have to sort of dial back on that. And so I'm trying a number of things. I mean, there's been some, big changes for me within this last year. My wife moved into memory care, so I was no longer doing hands-on caregiving at home, which was what was happening before. And so I've been sort of, I set myself a plan at the beginning of last year when I moved her out, because it's the first time I've lived on my own in 28 years. It's a big deal.
Oh, that's huge. That's
And,
huge.
I knew we were moving toward that point. It wasn't unexpected, but at the same time, it was still like, well, all right, how am I going to handle this now? And so I've been trying to get to a balance where each month I do something brand new that I haven't done before, and something I haven't done since the start of lockdown. So it's mostly local stuff, but I went to Edinburgh. I went to Glasgow for Worldcon last year. So that was one of my new things. I took a road trip with some friends that we've been talking about for a couple of years. Checked out some things in the Twin Cities that I hadn't been to before. So a lot of that kind of stuff. And that's been kind of for balance. At the same time, I have a tendency to overschedule, and boy, have I done that.
I cannot throw stones. I cannot. Absolutely.
So, there's been stuff where, and I'm looking at, what's coming, because it's not going to be good. And part of me is like, why can't I make time to volunteer? And I'm like, no, stop. Just stop. Get all this stuff done, and then you can see if you can do that too. But until then, all this stuff comes first. So some of it is prioritizing, and some of it is, what I was trying to do for a while was, take Friday nights, and Friday nights were just like a me night, and I would sit quietly and veg out. And schedule wise, I have not been able to make that work most of the time. So instead, what we do is a friend who started coming over at the beginning of lockdown and was our pod friend. So he'd come over every Sunday night, and I'd cook, or we'd do takeout or whatever, just kind of keep the local restaurants more or less alive, watch things. And we did that every Sunday year. And we're still doing that, so that's definitely a thing. I have like a monthly call with friends, and I have like a monthly breakfast with a different friend, that kind of stuff, to kind of balance things out. This year I'm going to work pretty hard at maybe not doing, I don't know, 2 events in the same weekend.
What?
Yeah, that was a lot.
Madness.
I did. I have a lovely, lovely assistant who's been with me for years now. And my assistant was like, I can go and do this event. I have watched you sell books. I have sold books for you. I know how to do this. I was like, but I can summon the energy, and I can take the 1.5-hour drive to this place and do this. And she's like, no. All right, fine. Thank you.
It's so important, and it's important to have that person in your life who's like, I'm going to tell you no, because you won't tell yourself no. The grand arbiter is that person for me in my life. And he will tease me very frequently. He's like, so your reward for working is more work? That's what you decided was a good way to balance things, was to be like, ooh, I worked a lot, so now I can work on another project. I'm like, yes. But when you were talking about finding time to volunteer, that was sort of like that vibe, right? You're going to work hard enough that you can carve out enough time that you can do this other work, because it feeds your soul, and that's part of it. So we do have some wonderful questions though, and I want to get these in here before I take us too far afield, because to be honest, my darlings, I sometimes forget that I need to ask Catherine questions, because I'm so happy to simply be chatting with Catherine, making me the worst interviewer ever. So Alicia asks, is there a genre you would like to publish that you haven't yet as a publisher?
I mean, I would say there's definitely, books I would love to see, and genres I'd like to build up in our catalog. I had decided from the beginning that we were going to focus on science fiction, fantasy, and horror, because those are my sweet spots. It's what I read.
Yes.
So we don't branch out, because it's outside. Like, I like some romance, I like some mystery, but it's not like my thing per se. Could be eventually, I suppose. I'm certainly dabbling enough in mystery these days. So certainly areas of queer horror, for example, that I'd love to see more of. I would love to see us have more queer science fiction, which is something we don't get a lot of.
No.
And I mean, part of being, a niche publisher is that, there's things that we simply can't do that a larger press can do, and there's that we can do that a larger press can't. And sometimes authors are looking for a different experience. And so I'm getting a lot savvier about being able to look at stuff and say, I'm sorry, I love your work, but we are not a fit. And that bums me out. It may change eventually, but it's not going to change right now. And rather than have you sit there and figure out how to change it, I would rather that you did something that made you happy with it right now, So, that comes up. And that was the thing I kind of had to learn early on, because I, initially figured it was just like, I'll do all the things. And then at a certain point, I'm like, okay, there are people who are not going to be comfortable with this, and their discomfort is going to make it challenging for me to work with them. And I don't have the spoons for that. So I need to recognize when things are done, when relationships aren't going to work, that sort of stuff, the kind of things you learn from dating. That point at which you realize that you and this person either no longer communicate, or maybe never communicated that well with, but there are other things over that. So I would love to do more steampunk books. I'd love to do more Weird West books. I've been talking to Alex, hopefully doing some more, Captain Ramos stories. Alex has a lot going on. For those of you who have read Alex's Murder on the Titania and Wireless, they're wonderful stories. The book club read them, which thank you. I know you've talked about them. Alex has been on the show. Alex is also writing for World of Warcraft. So if you're somebody who plays World of Warcraft, they've written like 3 tie-ins. They're like, rule books and game scenarios and so forth. So definitely check those out. Recommend that. So there's a bunch of things that I'd like to see. There's also, one of the things that I tell people up front when they ask about working with me is that I have to look at your work and go, I'm going to be super excited about sitting behind a table with this in front of me for years at a time, going, hey, what do you like to read? Have you tried this? Over and over and over and over again.
Yes.
So I have to just love the pieces out of anything, that we're publishing, because that's part of the game, is that, what I'm offering an author is that I will keep your name on the map for as long as humanly possible. And in order to do that, I have to believe in that work, so that's something that is something you kind of learn after a few years. But it also makes it difficult to say, and now we're going to expand to, 40 titles a year, for example. I would have to bring in other people, and it would have to be a bigger vision than mine. Am I ruling that out? No. I'm just saying that that's what it would take to get to that point. I spend a lot of time looking at who survives and who doesn't in this business, as publishers. And it's interesting because when I started out, I had assumed that it, had to do with financial stability, visibility, a certain level of, reputation and connections. And I figured that, you got through all of that stuff, like it's that easy. And you were good to go. And I have watched so many people shut down who had all of those things, but either didn't have the, the drive to continue doing it. Sometimes the point of all common sense, or doing it, realized it wasn't their thing and stopped, and so just recognizing that having a very deep-rooted passion for it that you can sustain, is such a critical part of making books happen. And that's true for writing too. I mean, there's so many obstacles, and especially if you're chasing, the agented and big publisher route. I mean, you can spend years and years trying to break in, and get rejection after rejection after rejection. And, it can be very challenging to deal with that. And
It's hard to take that kind of constant rejection and maintain your spirits, because it's not as though we have our little council of people in our office or our writing salon who are whispering in our ear constantly, it's all right, you're still beautiful and talented and your work is still good. I mean, the rejection starts to take its toll, as does just the entire load of doing the work of creating art. But I think this idea you're talking about of holding on to the things that you're passionate about and leaning into that is so essential to make it at any level of the arts, but especially when you're doing the independent, self-directed, more niche, small experience, because you don't have the New York publishing money to sort of sustain you during dry spells, or a horde of young, fresh-faced people coming out of college to hand sell your books. You're doing that. And I see Madeline here in the comments, Madeline Holly Rosing, who's also been a guest before, who self-publishes like such a fiend all the time and hosts Kickstarters and is out there hand selling her own work all the time. And it's nonstop and it's hard and the hustle is real. But you, Catherine, clearly do have so much passion for the pieces you choose and promote. Whenever we talk about like some new book, you always have so much energy and enthusiasm for it and so many lovely insights. And whenever I reach out to you, I'm like, oh, we're looking for something maybe for book club. Do you have something that might fit? Do you have a recommendation? My darlings, the answer is always yes. Catherine has many wonderful things for us. And we do have a book from you again on the schedule for this year, because when I say you're one of our favorite publishers, I mean it. We keep coming back to you because you do have these really beautiful titles that you've curated because you're passionate about it. And the passion shows in the finished project that you and that author have created. Because I know it's a collaboration between the editor, the author, the press, that you are constantly in conversation. So, and thank you for doing that work and showing up. And to the young people who may or may not be listening, because I know our demographic, um, this is a good note to you as well, that sometimes what you need to do is actually just lean in on the thing you love and not try and fit yourself into the niche you think is marketable right now. So on a different note, Robin, Scone Mistress, who is a huge fan of Glasgow and loves the Willow Tea Room, has to know if you got to the Willow Tea Room whilst you were there.
I did. I got to go and do tea there, and it was marvelous. I met an editor friend, and we had a lovely tea the night before, and the streets are in excitement. And they fell over some broken pavement, sprained their ankle, but insisted on to tea. And after tea, I mean, we had of Glasgow in order to find them a boot and ice and so forth. Then we had to go find them a cab. So we did all that stuff, and then I went back the next day so I could see the museum as well, because there's a Rennie McIntosh, museum about his wife and him and his work and his patron, and it's really fascinating. Really, they have some of the doors he designed and cutlery and just all kinds of stuff. Because the woman who ran the Willow Tea Rooms, there were a couple of them, hired him and gave him free reign everything. So like the tablecloths, the wall decorations, the silverware, everything. So it was fascinating to go and look at that and see all of the things that the artists that he influenced. Some of you may be familiar with the work of Jesse King. She was primarily a children's book illustrator, but she also did illustrations for some of Oscar Wilde's work. And just a really interesting, really gorgeous style. So it was really fun to get to do that. I was glad. The tea was also very, very good. So highly recommended.
I love Charles Rennie Mackintosh and his wife's work. She often gets overlooked, and that's a whole conversation right there.
Yeah.
I did have the pleasure to go to the art school and visit it before it burned down. And so I feel actually quite fortunate because it was incredible. But I never got to the Willow Tea Room. So I'm like like this much jealous. I was on my I was in a different life, my darlings, and the person I was traveling with was not as fun as all of you. So we didn't get to go to the tea room because he didn't want to. But I'm so happy you got to go. And I love that we can have a conversation about the hardships of art and the importance of community, and in the next breath we're like, but let's talk about tea and how much we love this place. And it's also a conversation about the arts, because the Widow Tea Room is connected with this wonderful arts and crafts movement and the wonderful 19th century artists who, not all of them were queer, but there was a certain thread of queerness going through this narrative too. And like, we can look back at our ancestor artists and where we're at today. And the arts and crafts movement was very much about this conversation of being, independent and having a do-it-yourself ethos and saying no to the big business and the big industrial complex, even in the 19th century. So I love that connection to those artists and where we're at today as small, independent, community driven people making art in the world. I don't think there's a question there. It's just an observation. So pardon me for going on. Scone Mistress asks again. She says she thinks you mean the Cranston tea rooms. Was that the precursor to the Willow Tea Rooms, Scone Mistress? I am uncertain, but please share away in the comments if you do have the answers. I appreciate it.
So at this point, there's 2 Willow Tea Rooms in Glasgow. One is pretty new, and the other is they took one of the Cranston tea rooms, rechristened it the Willow Room, and there's a museum that's next door to it that's run by the Scottish Heritage Foundation, whatever it's called.
They're wonderful. They're wonderful.
So yeah, so Cranston was the surname of the woman who originally ran that one and the other tea rooms. The new tea room is not on the site of one of the historical ones, from what I can recall. The old one is, and that's why they put the museum there as well. So
I love that, and I am so happy you got to do tea and also to go to Glasgow and experience Worldcon. I'm assuming you'd done Worldcon previously because you're a starry, wonderful author and get to do these fabulous things. But was this your first time, or were you a veteran returning?
It was my first time in Scotland, but I've been to several Worldcons. I was at Helsinki Worldcon a few years back, and that was marvelous. Among other things, we did, speaking of queerness, we did a Tom of Finland walking tour in Helsinki because Finland was going through this rediscovery period of queer heroes of their past as they began to legalize same-sex marriage. And so like fabric stores had Tom of Finland fabric. Just look it up if you're an adult.
This is an adult search, absolutely.
Very definitely an adult search. And there were stamps. You could go to the post office and get stamps for Tom of Finland. There was a coffee room selling Tom of Finland coffee. But my absolute favorite thing, and Worldcon Helsinki was great. I had a marvelous time. We took the ferry from Helsinki to Stockholm. And because we had, just a few days, and we thought, okay, let's go to Stockholm so we can, check it out. And the night ferry was marvelous, had a great time, ran into friends, was out on the decks chatting until all hours, looking at at the Baltic and having a swell time. And when we got up the next morning, breakfast buffet, there were two choices for coffee: Tomland coffee and Moomin coffee. This is like a pivotal experience of my life that I'm never forgetting.
This is amazing. I've only learned about the Moomins, all of that in the last 2-3 years, thanks to the power of the interwebs. But Tom of Finland, of course, is, or maybe not, of course, for those of you listening, this might not be an of course moment, but he is a very important queer icon, and his art is it's delicious, and iconic and very particular. And also, you should definitely do like a hidden search or a private window or an adult search moment when you look it up. Do not search on your work computer. This is for your home, your privacy. So beautiful and so queer, and absolutely so delicious. I love that they celebrated his work in that way, and that you got to have this experience. I've never been to a WorldCon. I'm so excited to go. I'm like very starstruck for the
Oh, are you coming to Seattle?
I am. Are you going to be there?
I am. I just got my programming invite. So yeah.
We're doing programming too.
Yay!
I'm so excited. Oh, I'm certain that there are other queers who attend WorldCon.
Oh yes, yes.
I cannot imagine it's a queer-free book space, but I'm so delighted because so many queer authors and artists that I personally know are going. And so I'm like, are we going to just have a rainbow meetup one night? Or are we just going to like descend? No one will notice because they're very used to it in Seattle, but I would love that. I'm very, very excited.
Yes, we'll definitely on that, because that needs to happen. But yes, that's the plan. And then it's one of my bucket list items. My friend and I are going to share a roomette on Amtrak and take the train back so we can go over the Rockies and see the sunrise and everything.
Oh my goodness, exciting. That's so exciting. Cheshire, I look forward to seeing you there in Seattle. And Madeline Holly Rosing has applied for a vendor table. Madeline, I'm keeping my fingers crossed for you. Selfishly, it's so I can like come and see you and say hello, and give you hugs, but also because I want people to buy your things. So, and as an aside, Catherine, we will finally meet in person at WorldCon.
Yes. That's one of the things that I like about WorldCon is it's the chance to meet, I went to Kansas City, I've been to Chicago a couple of times, so I've been to a few of them, and it's this great people that you ordinarily don't see. Getting to go in the UK was awesome because there are people I know from online who I'd never met in person before. And, just getting to see them, getting to see people I haven't seen in a few years. It was just marvelous. It was very much worthwhile. So.
Well, and so Bill, whom you know, of course, has suggestions for you on your return trip, roommate on Amtrak. So exciting. What a wonderful, fantastic adventure. This thing you're discussing, though, is one of the things I love so much about convention experiences at any level, is getting to connect with our community in person. The virtual space has been so wonderful, especially in the last 5 years, for us to be able to continue to have our community connection and even grow it in some wonderful ways. Without virtual book club, for instance, I never would have had the opportunity to meet you and Alex X and to start having a sort of I don't want to call it collaboration, a relationship with your press, in which I'm like, can you send us author recommendations? We would like to feature your books. Great, perfect, let's go. It's been so wonderful for 5 years now. But getting to meet in person is truly magical. And also being at a point in history that even though we are looking at a time when things are going to be very difficult uh, for lots of communities, but certainly for the LGBTQ community in the next few years. Having this opportunity to meet in person and to be out and proud artists together is it's a treasure, and I'm very grateful and excited for this. But it brings up the sort of like difficulties we're facing. Do you have some strategies for yourself in to sustain yourself in this next few months, in this year ahead, as we are going into the unknown but suspected?
Yeah, I mean, there's some things that, I'm doing that I'm already doing. So, we have a new queer community center, so I bought a membership there to help support them. We have a long established LGBTQ library here in the Twin Cities. I already had a membership there. Looking at ways that I can do some events, at locations, kind of outreach, register our local prides, doing the things that I can do to help sustain our public spaces and our, the things that we need for, reaching our communities. So that's one thing. On a personal level, I'm still wrangling a lot of personal stuff, but I'm actually branching out into fiber arts. So like I know how to crochet, but a lot of it's self-taught. So I'm taking a crochet class next weekend from a local gay-run knitting shop, which is just this like over-the-top fabulous studio with chandeliers. And the guy who runs it has been on the cover of Vogue Knitwear back in the days when he looked kind of more like young Rod Stewart. And so it's all completely over the top, and so I'm going to take a class there. I'm signing up for things like learning how to darn and mend things. Just because there's going to be, we're going to want to be able to do things like repair our own clothes. Figuring out things I can home. I'm very active in my community's Buy Nothing Club. So Buy Nothing is unfortunately primarily based on Facebook. So we'll see move, but what it does is it's a way to pull people together where you give people things or services that you have and don't have, aren't using anymore, don't have an immediate need for, etc. And other people trade back and forth with you. So example, today I picked up some new, somebody was getting rid of their cat's diabetic needles and needle kit because their cat was no longer diabetic, which is great news. My cat just got diagnosed with diabetes, so came home with a set of extra needles, which is going to be really handy. We have stuff where people are doing meal trains for people who've had crises. So we have all of this stuff going on, that helps. In some cases, it helps people save money. In other cases, it's helping people, where it's one less thing that you do, it's one less thing that you're buying. So as a way to, try to keep things more in a communal level, keep things out of the landfill, keep things circulating, but also build up a community of support. And so I've been with that for the last couple of years. That really kicked off in 2020, not surprisingly.
No, right. Yeah, so, it was the time for it.
Yeah.
And I love that sentiment, because you're right that participating in this way locally is so critical to not only supporting ourselves, but keeping our community healthy so we can be resilient together. And I love that you are a person who's just like, all right, I need to do this, so I'm going to connect with my community center and I'm going to take classes. And you have a fearless spirit, Catherine. I don't know if you know this about yourself, but you clearly do. And I love that. Also, yes, as someone's house panther has big feelings. Yes. So vocal.
Yes, she does. It's food time. And so we are expressing ourselves. Sometimes it's petting time and we express ourselves about that too, but we are loud, and we are now, both cats are about years old now, and I think their hearing is starting to go because they're getting louder and louder each year.
I love that though. And we love cats around here. So I'm very happy to hear the beautiful sound of your kitty, even though clearly you're a monster for not immediately ending this call and going to feed your kitties.
Well,
But
it could also be petting or brushing time. It's hard to figure,
right, but
any
you must
one of those things is approached with the same level of kitty passion. So
so much fun.
brush me,
So
pet me, cuddle me, feed me, all the things.
do
And
the
sometimes it's
stop it.
just lay down on the bed with us now.
But must be now, right now. Nothing else matters. Only kitties. I love that. I love cats. Having cats myself, Monsieur Gâteau definitely brings the same exact energy to everything as well. It's wonderful, and I feel very much like a cat myself, so I cannot criticize them. But as you were talking about all of these things you're doing to connect with your community, to support the resources that are there, that have been springing up, it brought up something to me because one of the things I loved about getting to know you was that suddenly I was like, oh, wait, we have all these friends in common. How did we not know each other before? And it's this thing that even as a member of the LGBTQ community, sometimes I'm a little bit wonderstruck about it. No matter how far apart we are, we kind of all secretly start to know each other. Do you feel like you know every queer author and editor out there in genre fiction that exists? That's probably an exaggeration, but
I mean, it's definitely possible to get to a point where you know of people. I mean, there's a lot of folks where I know of them, but for a variety of reasons, we've just never connected. So we both know the other ones there, but it's not necessarily a community so much as a hey, the hat tip. You know, what we used to call gaydar back in the day.
I don't know what we call it these days. I don't know what the young people are calling it, honestly.
I
I
don't know
go
either. It's a good
I
question.
go to TikTok, but that's a whole thing. 6 queers of separation. That's what we're calling it now. Thank you, Cheshire.
Okay.
I'll run with that. But there is this thing that if you are part of a minority community, I think that when you enter an art space or any space really, but you start looking for other members of your community. And I had a young person once years ago ask me why all of his friends who are women or queer or people of color were like, oh, that's a business owned by a member of my community. I want to go there. He was like, why does it matter? Why isn't it enough that it's a good business? And I had to explain to him it's because we knew it was A, safe, and B, we wanted to support our own so there would be more of us in spaces.
Yeah.
And it's so important to have this connection, right? So when we go to Worldcon, we can get up to shenanigans and be like, find all the queer authors. It's time for the party train. What are we doing? We don't know, but it's fun. So
I'm going to be rooming with one of my authors too, so it'll be really easy to find.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. No,
I know Alex is definitely planning on being there, so you'll get to meet Alex in person. I'm going to be rooming with Heather Rose Jones, one of my authors. Jenny Galaboy, who's one of my other authors, is a literary agent, and Jenny is going to be there doing literary agent things, but occasionally overlaps with us. Michael Miriam and his lovely wife are planning on being there as well, and their first Worldcon, so that'll be pretty cool. So yeah,
exciting.
It'll be people to meet.
I
don't know if Melissa Scott's planning on it. I'll ask. I think not, but
well, at least this is very selfish, but at least for me personally, every author I've had an opportunity to read and feature and never gotten to meet, that I get to meet at Worldcon is going to be like my own personal like little Girl Scout badge collection. I'll be like, and then I met Alex X and I got to shake their hand and be like, I love your book in person, but respectfully. So
not in like a fanish way.
respectfully, like a professional, as I am. I'm absolutely a hot mess in person, so it'd be wonderful. But you also talked about, you mentioned a little bit, the Buy Nothing groups and these sorts of connection as well, and how in the current climate with the changes to Facebook, we don't know how some of these community connections are going to continue to thrive and where that's going to go. You're on the socials, you're an artist. You almost have to be on the social media. I don't know how artists who don't use social media to some degree are able to exist in the current ecosystem.
It's
And
complicated.
Yeah. How do you do
part
it?
of it is that you get the social networking. I mean, from a writing and publishing standpoint, you get that after you have, the growth in ebooks. So it's a conduit back and forth. So for us, for me as a publisher, the bulk of our sales are ebook format. So losing that would be a big hit. We do sell ebooks directly, so it's like if Amazon suddenly blacklists us tomorrow, we haven't, but we still have to get the word out about that, and people are much more dependent on that than they were. And so pure word of mouth takes longer to set up. So these are things that are certainly on my mind going into this next year of, okay, so we've got a bunch of people who are very into book bans. How far are they going to take it? What books are they going to ban? What is that ban going to look like? We don't primarily do books for kids. We have one title that is, I would say, is our all ages title. We have got a couple of things that are YA friendly. But it means that we can probably continue to sell things in person at the scope of how that happens. So it's just, thinking about a lot of that kind of stuff. I do know folks who are still presses where they literally are selling things out of the back of their car. They drive around to event after event and they just do book tables and they don't do ebooks at all.
Wow.
I don't know what the financial picture on that looks like. I'm guessing not spectacular, but it does happen. I know people who are aspiring to get to that point, and I wish them luck.
Absolutely. I mean, look, as a person who loves books and loves promoting them and hand selling people books because I just want other people to read the authors I love, I am, worried for where we're going. And also, I am that person who buys mostly digital books. They have been wonderful for the kind of reader I am. And also, as a person who is no longer young, it's really nice to be able to expand the text. That's really nice. I'm like, ooh, make it bigger. That's so good. But we do have a sort of monopoly situation, and not entirely, but Amazon is a huge stranglehold on the digital book space. I know Barnes and Noble also has digital books, but a lot of people go the Kindle route. And some of the small places that people could use are starting to report that they are cracking down on romance novels and queer books as erotica or porn already this week. So I don't know what the solution is except to keep promoting your books, everyone's books, and encouraging everyone who's listening today to please continue to buy queer books and to support romance authors, especially romance authors who are queer people writing queer books. It's going to be hard because all of the things you just mentioned, this sense that as a member of the LGBTQ community,
stick a few more letters in there.
I'm just going to go back to my favorite word, queer. Honestly, this is why I use queer all the time. It's just nice to have an umbrella. So as a member of the queer community, you're already saying we don't have children's books. We don't really, we have things that are young adult friendly, but all ages, but that's not what we're selling. And it's because we already know that that's going to be a flag and a trigger, and it's really a hard moment to be at. And the alphabet mafia. Thank you, Cheshire. It's like I got lost in my own verbiage. And yes, absolutely, we need to keep sharing and loving the books. Absolutely. Thank you, Jim. It's true. We do have to do that, but also it's more than that, right? I mean, I don't know what the answer is, but Catherine, I am excited to continue to promote your books and your press, and I'm excited for whatever you have coming up in the new year. Do you have
I have things coming up in the new year, personally.
Yes, all right. Yes, good. What can we look forward to?
The Kickstarter for this will go live next month, but there's a new, as in started last year, Canadian magazine of sword and sorcery, where it's called New Edge, and the publisher is a lovely, lovely gentleman from the west coast of Canada, and he's working very hard at creating sword and sorcery with a more diverse perspective. So authors of color, queer authors, queer representation. So they've just started publishing some books, but they're also doing the magazine. So they're doing the Kickstarter for that, starts off next month. And I have an essay about Joanna Russ writing Sword and Sorcery. Joanna Russ was one of the first authors to be out in science fiction and fantasy, along with Samuel Delany. And she wrote, many, many brilliant things, but she wrote a series of stories that fall pretty squarely into sword and sorcery. And she calls them that. She's unfortunately no longer with us. So I wrote an essay about that. So that'll be appearing in a coming episode of excited about, because last year and the tail end of the year before was hard enough. I was really just not getting to my own writing. I am working on a new story in Heather Rose Jones has a series called, it's a podcast and a blog, the Lesbian Historic Motif Podcast and Project. And she does this incredible amount of research about representation of queer women throughout history. And so there's all these just fascinating tidbits and scholarly articles that she's linked to. And, she can really talk critically because she's read like the 6 other things that are out there on this topic. And, she's done an amazing job with that. But she also does a podcast where she interviews authors, she does reviews, and a couple of times a year she releases fiction. So I'm working on something that will hopefully get into this year's series of episodes. I have a series of they're purely historical, no fantasy elements, of sapphic pirate and spy set in the 17th century Caribbean stories. And there's 4 of them so far. And maybe there's 5. I think there's 5 of them now. I've lost track. So this will be the 6th one. Eventually I'm going to release them in a short collection. I've been kind of adding to them. So this is going to be one of the stories that fills in a gap where people are like, how did they get from here to here?
I agree with Bill on this. Sign me up. It sounds amazing. I'm so excited. It sounds so good. It sounds so good.
So I have a lot of fun with those. So I'm working on that. And then I've got I'm in discussions about a gaming tie-in story. I do some gaming writing as well. So I've worked on a couple of tie-ins for World of Darkness anthologies. So I've got stories in one of the Vampire and the Masquerade ones and one of the Wraith ones. And much to my surprise, because the lovely editors did not do this, I thought I was writing a story for Ghost Hunters, which is another one of the World of Darkness properties. And I thought I was writing a story that was just going to be in the anthology. And time passed, and lo and behold, the rule book came out. And I was like, whatever happened to that story? And I opened up the rule book and discovered that they used my story as the in-game scenario. So I've written the in-game scenario for Ghost Hunters World of Darkness.
Yes. Oh, that's so fantastic. So fantastic.
It sounds like I'm going to be doing some more gaming writing as well. It'll probably be in tie-in anthologies, but we'll see. Who knows? And then I've got some other ththings floating around that I'm working on. Plus, I'm working on my next werewolf novel, which will be the third werewolf novel. I've written a series of novels about these women who discover that as they enter menopause, they turn into werewolves. And so book 1 and book 2 are out. I've been working on book 3 for a while. A bunch of stuff happened. One of the things that actually happened last year, speaking of community and feedback and so forth, was that I had started the book in a different place with a different point of view. And thanks to all of the zillions of book tables I did last year, I talked to so many people who had read the first 2 books and had feelings about them that they needed to share with me, that by the end, like, I have started this in the wrong place. So I'm revamping and, starting back up again, but it's already feeling better. It's already feeling like this was what it should have been. So I'm really excited about that. So there will be a third werewolf novel coming out in the nearish future. So.
All right, listen, everyone. If you have not read these menopausal werewolf books, I need you to do it because I love them so much. Catherine, I know you did not write them for me, but they came into my life at exactly the right time. And I think you know what I mean by the right time. And I just feel very seen and supported, and I love them so much. They're fantastic reads and such a cool premise. I love everything about it. So please read them so that Catherine can write more of them, because selfishly I would like more. Thank you very much. Yes, and Temperance does need to read them, Mr. Springer. I will make sure you have the links to buy them for Temperance, because that's the kind of girl I am. So.
Oh, and if I may, one quick Queen of Swords press plug. So last year, a lot of time, went into, I re-released all of the Estrant novels, which are by Melissa Scott. They originally, the concept was developed by Melissa Scott with her partner, Lisa A. Barnett, who unfortunately died a number of years ago. And so they wrote 2 books together, and then Melissa wrote a number of others around them. So I released all 5 volumes of Estrant books to date last year. We're releasing the brand shiny new Estrant novel, Point of Hearts, in March. And one of the things I did want to mention for this particular group is that Melissa's developed a couple of tea blends out on Adagio Tea for the Estrant series. And there is a Point of Hearts blend. There's also a Point of Hopes blend, which is one of the earlier books. But if you liked Death by Silver and or A Death at the Dionysus Club, these are also, they're gay fantastical mysteries. They're set in a sort of, it's a Renaissance style world. So it's more like the free on the Baltic. It's that kind of feel. It's a merchant empire, basically. But the world building is fabulous. The writing is brilliant. And Nico and Wraith, Wraith and Esslingen, who are the protagonists, have a slow burn romance that progresses through all of the books. And they have this, beautifully developed, relationship between the 2 of them where, you're always rooting for them. So as it's going to get cold, I recommend getting some nice tea, the new book, and then maybe picking up some of the earlier ones because they're all so good. There's just and I say that as somebody who is now a lot.
No, and
Still loving it.
everyone I've spoken to has only the highest praise for this series of books. All of the fans I've met are very avid. So, obviously this is a wonderful series to connect with, because it elicits a lot of very positive, happy passion from readers. And I love that. And also, you touch on something that I meant to ask you about much earlier in our conversation, and I'm going to shoehorn it in now. Um, in this moment in the world, Tanith Lee is back in the conversation a lot.
Yes.
I am going to sort of skim over the context, everyone, because while we've touched on some heavy things, we're not touching on some really messy things right now. We're mostly focusing on Catherine and queerness and joy. But one of the things that you are such a champion for and represent yourself, because neither of us are young people anymore, is like this older woman author in sci-fi and fantasy and horror who often gets forgotten, because publishing, it's not super gendered necessarily. There is always a gender component, but older authors just get forgotten as the newer authors come up and we're into the new hotness, and it's a normal progression. So I'm not necessarily attributing anything nefarious, but I do think the thing that is gendered is that the older female authors don't always get mentioned again. They get forgotten by the academy and the canon. And so Elizabeth Bear and I had this conversation when she was on. It was so lovely to talk about some of the great aunties of sci-fi and fantasy. Who are some of the wonderful aunties in genre fiction that you wish people knew about and would give a try? Because listen, read Tanith Lee. She's
Yeah,
amazing,
definitely.
absolutely, but she's not the only one. So,
Yeah. And something to bear in mind, a friend of mine brought this up the other day on Blue Sky, is that Tanith Lee was incredibly prolific and wrote for a long time, which is, on the one hand, enormous. I love some of her work very, very much. However, some of the earlier stuff is of its time.
yes,
So,
it is.
it's something you kind of want to, look at what it is that you enjoy in a book, especially an earlier fantasy novel, and whether or not that one's going to work for you, or you maybe want to try some of her later stuff.
Yes,
So
yes.
Angela Carter is another one. Also, just like this amazing creator of Gothic horror. If you've ever seen A Conspiracy of Wolves, it was based on her short story. So, feminist werewolves, feminist takes on fairy tales, Little Red Riding Hood, just all kinds of things. I'm going to put in a big plug for Joanna Russ, because I just reread all of the Alex stories, including one I hadn't read before, to really kind of get, grounded for this essay that I just wrote. And even the absolutely love, I admired the craft so much it made it worthwhile. It's like, this is just beautifully sculpted.
Yes.
Melissa Scott. I mean, Melissa Scott was already, a big deal when I got into the genre as a baby fan. So, she was, out and queer and writing queer characters and doing some amazing, amazing work. She wrote a lot of science fiction before switched into fantasy. But she's written alternate history. She's written all kinds of stuff. So I recommend checking out the rest of her catalog, which is like this. We're publishing a portion of it, but the rest of it is like so much, so many books.
Yes.
Let's see. Just trying to think of other folks that I'm like, just you've had Caroline Stevermer on. Caroline is
Amazing.
terrific. We have a monthly breakfast where we get together and hang out. And she mentioned how much she enjoyed being at the book club and how great it was.
I
And
was so chuffed. I was so
marvelous stuff. I mean, Sorcery and Cecilia is just a brilliant book, and there's two more after that.
yeah.
So heartily recommend those. Heartily recommend her other work. Let's see, other people who've You know, Martha Wells has written some, you know, steampunk adjacent stuff.
Yes,
And
yes.
Martha and I go far enough that I was at dinner city in the before times, before lockdown and all of that, at Worldcon, as a matter of fact. And Martha said, and I quote, "Well, nobody knows who I am anymore, but I guess that's okay." And 6 months later, Murderbot hit. And then we were no longer having that conversation.
No, listen, can we have a moment for Martha Wells?
Martha Wells
Because
is awesome.
so
Out of anyone whose career I have ever watched, Phoenix like from the ashes, totally deserved. Love her stuff.
absolutely.
But some things like Death of the Necromancer might be something people here would enjoy if they haven't read it
Yes,
yet. And a lot
yes.
of her earlier stuff is now getting re-released. It's getting new editions based on how well the Murderbot books have done. So, you know, definitely something to you know, keep an eye out for. Let's see.
And also,
Yeah,
thank you.
there's a lot of others, and I could just keep going endlessly, but in the interest of like keeping it
Yeah,
reasonable, we'll maybe stop there for now.
yeah. I'll probably ask you again. I think it's turning into one of my new favorite questions, especially from women authors, because we have our own experience of who was so influential for us as readers and authors. And so, harkening back to those aunties and giving them their flowers, I think, is a really lovely moment to share. And I'm so happy you brought up Martha Wells because I have loved her writing since Death of a Necromancer. It is one of my favorite books, and I'm always harping on about it. And it's really nice to have someone else be like, "You should read this." I'm like, "Yes, you should." I'm not the only one. So I don't want to keep you
Oh,
forever, but I do because
one quick addition to that. Just speaking of Phoenix like from the ashes, Sherry Priest has some new stuff coming out. I
Yes.
don't know how steampunk it is. She's been kind of skewing a bit more toward horror, but you know, if you like her work, you might like this as well. So she had one new book out last year with a smaller press, and she's got another big press book coming out this next year. So
No, her new stuff is for me too scary personally. I'm like kind of a lightweight on that front, but she's just an incredible writer, such a stunning author, and her prose is so beautiful. It makes me want to be able to read horror. Is sort of one of those things where I'm like, oh, I wish I could get through this, but I will not be able to sleep for 3 weeks if I read this book. So
I do want to say that when Alex during one of the interviews that they've done about the Marta Ramos books, Alex has said that Sherry Priest's steampunk, you know, books were a huge influence, inspiring them to write those.
so good. We just read Dreadnought in for book club last year.
Mhm.
Everyone does Bone Shaker, which is a fantastic book. You should read it absolutely. But I was like, oh, everyone's read that one. Let's do book 2. And then all the people in book club were like, we haven't read the first one. I was oh, no, go back and read it. It's so good too. But also Dreadnought is wonderful. Read everything. Sherry Priest is great. If there's one thing you can take away from the Saturday morning conversations, it's more books for your TBR pile. I would apologize, but I have absolutely no shame about it. So, Catherine, normally I would close out with my little modified Proust questionnaire. I don't want to keep you forever, whilst I do also want to keep you forever, to be honest. So I'm going to like shorten it way down from the normal 9 questions to be a polite host. And I just have 3 questions for you. And this is a thing where I like to remind people whatever answer springs to your mind is the right answer. And you're a wordsmith, you're an editor and author, and you write for White Wolf, which is my personal favorite game system. So
I have my own entry in the White Wolf wiki. I was so amazed. It's like fangirl moment. I mean, it's short, but it's there.
Still there. So, my first question for you is, what is your favorite swear or curse word, as it were?
Ooh. Hmm. That's a good question. I mean, up till a couple, because I'm old school Brooklyn, I would have just tradition. Now I'm not really sure. I don't know that I've settled on one that is really working for me. I mean, when highly agitated, I go very old school Brooklyn, in which case you get to hear it a lot because that is part of my code switching from back in the day when I would have spoken like this. Um, so let's say that I have not one that feels quite the same for me yet, but that one no longer feels quite the same to me, if that makes sense. So I'm in a transitional state.
Yeah. Transitioning to your new favorite swear. It's
Yeah.
it's like powering up, leveling up to the next tier of swearing. I love that. What is your favorite adjective?
Oh, wow. Hmm.
Or I guess I could ask you, what's the adjective when you are writing a manuscript you have to go and search find to
Yeah.
replace because you know you've overused it? Mine is delightful, so I always have to go in.
I'm an adverb kind of gal, so that's usually what I have to go back through and go, nope, nope. um, let's see. Right at the moment, I'm just going to pick cuddly because my cat is once again wedged on the chair behind me and is just purring so enthusiastically under my elbow that it's sort of reducing my capacity for thought.
I love that. They're very pernicious, but in the best way. They're like, look, if I cuddle and purr at you, I'm going to cause your brain to go offline, and you're going to be finished.
Nice.
Catspiration,
I like
absolutely.
catspiration. That's
That's
good.
beautiful. All right, my final question is, what is your motto if you were to have one?
My mother used to say, and I have gradually taken this on as I myself have gotten older. I don't remember. I should pick it up from life is short and death is cheap in the Foreign Legion. And the reason I'm weighing in on that one is it's one, delightfully cynical, and two, I think that a lot of us, it's so easy to be scared, to, close in, to go back into your shell, to not take risks. And I think that it's worthwhile to look at some of that and say to yourself, okay, when the day comes, where I'm shuffling off this mortal coil, however that happens, how do I want to be able to remember what I did before? How do I want to be able to remember my life, or how do I want other people to remember me? And I just love like the risk-taking element of that, because I'm pretty sure that it was from one of the movies. Protagonist runs off and joins the French Foreign Legion, like maybe the White Feather or something. But it was just something that she said it like right up into her 80s. She just, something would be going on. She'd say, "Oh well, life is short, death is cheap in the Foreign Legion."
I love that. That's wonderful,
and,
Catherine.
and, and it was a lot of how she lived her life. So I'm like, okay,
All
I
right.
can respect that. I think I want to take that on, kind of make that mine. So.
That's beautiful. This was such a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for making this time to be here this morning, to have brunch, to drink tea, to gossip about books and cats and art. And thank you for continuing to hold down the fort, to publish such fantastic books, to write such wonderful work, and to be a source of mentorship and inspiration in our broader queer community. Because you have leveled up to that point where people can be like, oh, there she goes, an elder queer leading the way. It's such a wild moment to be in. But thank you. Thank you for being a trailblazer, and thank you for sharing your time with us. I cannot wait to have you on again so we can have more conversations. But to be honest, I am absolutely over the moon that I'm going to see you at Worldcon this autumn, or like late summer.
August.
Yeah, August. The weird time. It'll be nice in Seattle and it will be horrific here. So I'm very excited. But I'll see you at Worldcon. And everyone, please go over to Queen of Swords Press. Pick your books up directly from Queen of Swords if you are able to. That is the best bet these days, to buy direct from our small independent publishers. If you are wondering how to get around any pitfalls with distributors deciding that they don't want to sell queer books, go to the queer folks. We'll sell you our books directly. That's the answer for now. In the meantime, please remember to treasure yourselves as I treasure you. The world is hard and difficult, but you are irreplaceable and so important to making the world a magical place. So please wash your hands, eat your vitamins and minerals, get your boosters and your vaccinations, drink the good tea, and life is short and death is cheap in the Foreign Legion. So go out there and have a great life and a wonderful afternoon. Thank you so much, my darlings. Cheers.